Hey ladies, this is Mocha Mommy here bringing you another video. And in this video, I want to talk about Abigail, okay? Abigail in the Bible. And I'm going to put this as part of my Dark Femininity playlist, not because I'm trying to encourage any kind of like quote unquote evil behavior or anything occult, but I just think that it's important as women to talk about strategy and strategic implementation of ideas and plans so that we can end up looking for more favorable outcomes in our lives. I feel as if right now in this space, there's been like a lot of, I guess, like shaming of women and shaming of behaviors. And there's kind of under the context of well, this is not godly, or this is not spiritual, or you Jezebels, or you, and not realizing that even when we look at the scriptures themselves, we see that people are very multifaceted. So even if you have a different belief system, I'm just going to bring to light the importance of understanding human behavior in the context of certain life situations, and how some of these women use a lot of shrewdness, intelligence, and strategic alliances and strategic moves to end up with more desired outcomes, to get more desired outcomes. So we're just going to go in the book of 1 Samuel, all right, chapter 25. So what I'm not going to do is just take one verse and then beat you over the head with it and say that I'm more spiritual than you, or I'm more holier than you. I want to take this entire chapter and then sort of break it down in a way, more importantly, have you read it, okay? And then just kind of point out a couple of key scriptures and key notes that can maybe put this whole story into context so that you ladies can better extrapolate the useful tidbits that can help you in your life. Okay, without trying to make this video too long to give you too much background, just going to give you a little bit of idea about the place and the setting. Right now, this is in the kingdom of Israel, and they are under attack by the Philistines. Okay. The Philistines are known as the giants. So the story that you ladies may know of David and Goliath. David, from a very small tribe, he's the youngest son, uses his great faith and boldness to defeat this giant who was one of the greatest of the Philistine army. He then gets appointed and gets looked favorably upon by King Saul. So King Saul was everything that the people of Israel wanted their king to be. He was well-spoken, he was handsome, he was tall, but he had a lot of mental and spiritual issues. So the prophet Samuel, who is kind of the spiritual leader at that time, anoints David the king. Well, that becomes very complicated because Israel already has a king. So even though Saul and David were on great terms at one point, even to the point where David had married Saul's daughter and was best friends with Saul's son Jonathan, now David is a fugitive. He's on the run because Saul is afraid that David will usurp his power, and also because of his own mental and spiritual problems, Saul is becoming overly aggressive. And therefore, David and a lot of men loyal to David that he has served with in the military are now on the run as fugitives. Now we enter 1 Samuel 25, where Samuel, who was the spiritual leader of Israel, has just passed away. So we'll start in verse 1 of chapter 25. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Parnan. A certain man in Moab, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 300 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealing. He was a Calebite. Now, why is him being wealthy and a Calebite? The significance of Nabal being a Calebite meant that he was a descendant of Caleb. If you go further back in like the books of Numbers and the books of Joshua, you'll see that Joshua and Caleb were the only two who actually got to see the promised land from like the old generation who had left Egypt and had spent the 40 years in the desert. Caleb was one of the only few who had survived that 40 years in order to retake the promised land. And that was a reward to him because of his great faith. So that means to show that Nabal, being a Calebite, he should have known better. He was raised in a tradition of faith, of service, of kindness, of generosity, because of the generosity and the tradition of his forefather, Caleb. So the fact that you have a Calebite who is this surly and mean just goes to further juxtapose Nabal's character with that of his legacy. He has the wealth because, of course, some of the most choice land in Israel was given to Caleb and his descendants, but he certainly didn't have the character and intelligence. Continuing on, when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days, and why should I take my bread and water and the meat that I have slaughtered from my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?" David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word to David. David said to his men, "Each of you, strap up your sword." So they did, and David strapped on his as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at him. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us the whole time we were out in the fields near them. Nothing was missing. Night and day, they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man, and no one can talk to him." Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 sehas of roasted grain, 100 raisin cakes, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on the donkeys. When she told her servants, "Go ahead, I'll follow you," but she did not tell her husband, Nabal. Now, continuing on, we see in verse 4, while David was in the wilderness, he's in exile at this point, hiding from Saul. He heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet them in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them. The whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable toward my men. Since we come at a festive time, please give your servants, your son David, whatever you can find for them." So when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal that message in David's name and waited. Okay, so basically, just think of the immense job that herding 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep are, and how dangerous that could possibly be, from marauding bands of robbers to wild animals. And David, of a courtesy, kind of gives these men a level of protection, and then asks, well, since it's that time of year where everybody's kind of celebrating, typically when all the sheep are getting sheared and all of the goats are being slaughtered, It's usually a big feast. So David is saying like, hey, since we know that you're having a feast, is it possible we can have the leftovers? Now, there's a couple of lessons here. Right now, we see that Nabal is just pretty discourteous, and he is very selfish and stingy. Again, not in line with the values that he was raised with. And we also see how the servants knew that a violation of this level was going to have some grave consequences. And they just felt like it's now no secret that Nabal is very foolish, right? It's no secret. The servants even know it. So apparently they have kind of a trajectory already of kind of circumventing Nabal's foolishness by consulting Abigail. All right. And so we see that the fact that the servants were so comfortable doing this and were very well aware of the customs and courtesies is just a further insult and a further highlight of Nabal's foolishness. And then we also see Abigail being very solution oriented. And here's the solution orientedness of Abigail. When she hears the story in its entirety, she acts quickly. All right. And why in verses 18 and 19 do we see them go over the menu? I'm going to explain that. Why are verses like 18 and 19 so important? Why would they bother to go over the menu? Okay, because each of the things that Abigail packs is a testament to her character. Okay, so we know that this is the time of the year where there is a festival. It's the time of harvest, and it's going to be the time of entertaining. So we know that she probably is making preparations for coming guests or for a coming celebration. So it's not uncommon to see her be that prepared. What is incredible is how prepared she is, okay? To know exactly to have 200 loaves of bread on hand. All right. It really just goes to show her level of wealth and abundance, okay? That she has 200 loaves on hand. It maybe shows the size of the staff she manages, or the level of resources that she's in charge of. If you have 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs. Okay, when we see wine and when we see fruits, we know that's also a sign of opulence of those days. Okay, and we also know that it's a sign of preparedness, because that meant that those items had to be prepared even earlier than this time of festival and harvest. Think of how long it takes for a grape to become a raisin. And then after that, it now becomes a cake. The same thing with the figs. So you had to grow the figs, harvest the figs, dry the figs, then press the figs. So it really just goes to show how far out she planned. So her level of preparedness is at a very high level, that not only can she complete these tasks and have them completed for her guests, she has that to spare. So it just goes to show you the level of preparedness that Abigail has. It really just goes to show you this woman is basically on a CEO level. Okay. The fact that you can have this much wine, figs, and raisins on hand goes to show you that this is something that she's been planning for months, if not a year in advance. So this really just goes to show you her level of preparedness. We also see that she has 5 dressed sheep. Okay. 5 dressed sheep means that sheep that are already butchered. Okay. So she's ready for things that she don't even know to be ready for. So her level of preparedness is not just for this feast, but her level of preparedness is also for the unexpected. We also see her with, 5 sehas of roasted grain. So this is a very, very strategic move also, because we know that chances are when Abigail gives the bread, the wine, and the fruit to David and his soldiers, they can eat for that day. But 5 sehas of roasted grain, that roughly is around 60 pounds. Okay. So depending on how many people that David have with him. So not only can they eat tonight, they're going to be able to eat in the future because she has some sort of like preserved, already roasted grain that probably can last for a while, that can last an army for a while. So this just goes to show you her level of preparedness for her own entertaining, possibly for her household, maybe going into the winter, going into the season that is coming. And then just how much she has to spare just goes to really show like her really strong management and accounting skills. Now we see Abigail is going to leave without telling her husband Nabal, okay? As she came riding her donkey into the mountain ravine, there was David and his men descending towards her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. He paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention to my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He's just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. As for me, your servant, I did not see the men that my lord sent. And now, my lord, as surely as the Lord God lives, as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who intend on harming my lord be like Nabal. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my lord, be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my lord. Because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies will hurl away in front of a pocket of a sling. And when the Lord has fulfilled my Lord, every good thing he promised concerning him has appointed him ruler over Israel. My Lord will not have his conscience be staggered, burden of needless bloodshed, or having avenged himself. When the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. Okay, so you'll see that there's two lords in this. Lord with the lowercase l, which means a person of honor, and then Lord with the capital L, meaning Lord God. Okay, so what Abigail does is she decides to not tell her husband this. And this is an important dark femininity lesson because what you tell who when is very important. You don't want to be known to be deceptive and just straight out lie to people, but you do want to be strategic in the information you disclose and when. Also, too, you see Abigail is very, very skilled at diplomacy. And one of those skills of diplomacy is one, kind of taking the situation and de-escalating, right? Because David was very, very angry. And she's like, you have every right to be angry. You have every single right to be angry. In fact, this is kind of his behavior. This is Nabal's behavior. He's not the wisest of all guys, okay? But you really are not on his level, David. Okay? You're not on that level of foolishness. You're not on that level of being mean and surly. You actually honor God and his commandments, unlike this guy who has no courtesy or no respect from, even though he knows better. He's a Calebite and he should know better. She also makes it a point to bring up things that are important to David, right? Things like he will hurl away from your enemy, like from the pocket of a sling, knowing how successful David had been with a slingshot. Kind of appeals a little bit to his ego when he talks to him, right? And it's like, I know that you're being pursued, David. So she has a clearer idea of current events, more so than her husband does, right? So kind of knowing what's going on, knowing the climate, knowing the culture, right? And then knowing exactly how to appeal to David and de-escalate what could have been a very tragic situation. Because not only Nabal dying, but all of the male servants also dying And being on the wrong side of an up and coming power structure could have meant something very detrimental to her. So again, you'll see Abigail's skill of diplomacy and the appeal she makes to his ego, and also who she lets know what, when. So certain servants, she said, you know what, show me where this is and let me take care of it. But let's be strategic about when we leave and who it is we tell. Now, before this video gets too long, I'm going to just kind of skip down so that you ladies can kind of get idea of what happened at the end of the story, right? David accepted the gift, right? And decided, you know what, you can go home in peace. Then when Abigail got home, she saw that Nabal was kind of already enjoying the feast, enjoying the festivities and the parties. And he was drinking too much, eating too much. His friends were there. And Abigail decided to not say anything at that point either. Let him kind of enjoy his party. Let him kind of enjoy himself. Then that next day, she says to him, in the morning, when Nabal was sober, okay, when he was sober, she didn't tell him when he was hungover or not feeling in the best mood. His wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So basically, it means he kind of had a stroke. And then Nabal ends up dying. Now Abigail was widowed. When David heard Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." So basically, Nabal was definitely in the wrong, and God repaid him that wrongdoing. And so now you see David sent word to Abigail asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent us to take you to become his wife." She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I am your servant and ready to serve you." Okay. And Abigail quickly attended her donkey and her 5 female servants and went with David's messengers and became his wife. Now, again, this just really goes to show you. Now, there's a lot more to this story, and it's also some foreshadowing about David's relationships and how tumultuous they were. Not necessarily with Abigail, but again, that's a whole nother story to try to not make this video too long. But you'll see what men who are foolish don't appreciate, men who are kings will. Her intelligence, her preparedness, her diplomacy were all very useful to someone who is to be king, but not very useful, in fact, adversarial to somebody who's a fool. So right now there's a lot of foolishness on display, right? And understand that that foolishness is going to come back to bite people in the butt. All right. So I understand the need to want to argue with foolishness, to the need to want to make right what has been done wrong. But at the same time, sometimes it's best to let people stand in it and deal with the consequences of their foolishness on their own. Now, what are some of the feminine lessons that we can take away from this? Number 1, preparedness. All right. Abigail's preparedness is what allowed her to act as quickly as she could because she was ready no matter what happened. The fact that she had food to spare, still able to put on her banquet, still able to manage her household, which had such great resources, really is a testament to her level of preparedness and her foresight. Her boldness. Okay. Her boldness is another thing. You have to think right now in 2022, it's controversial for women in the Middle East to drive. Okay. Imagine how it was back then to get up on a donkey and to head into the wilderness with an army full of men. So again, that took a lot of bucking the cultural norms, and it took a lot of bravery on her part to even just go to try to fix this situation. Being known as being the intelligent resource in a house of men who should have known better, particularly Nabal, okay? Just being the voice of reason in a chaotic situation can get you far places. Diplomacy, another thing. Diplomacy, knowing the culture, knowing the people, knowing how to appeal and de-escalate are all really important and very valuable skills that we really need to focus on as Black women. Because I think that for a culture that really either has us being, paints us as being either too bold and too confrontational, or if we're of the Christian faith, being too much of a pushover, really making sure that we have those diplomatic skills to be able to navigate situations to turn out favorably. Also, too, we start to see just good timing. When and who you tell what information to. That's also a very important part of dark femininity. That's also a good part of strategy. Not being deceitful, but just being careful how you disclose information. And food as diplomacy. So right now there are two really important diplomatic situations where you can use food to help advance yourself. All right. We have, of course, February 14th, Valentine's Day, bringing in the cookies or the cakes to work, to your coworkers, to really let them know, maybe that Friday beforehand, which will be I think that will be the 11th. Friday the 11th. That's going to be probably a great day to really show a little bit of diplomacy to your workplace. And also Sunday, February 13th. That is going to be the Super Bowl, again, where people bring dishes of food as diplomacy. And there may be, Super Bowl parties or office get-togethers, things like that. I always use the Super Bowl as a great way for diplomacy. One of the things I'm going to be doing this year is getting trying a couple of different artichoke dip recipes. So this way, and I'm going to make it a point to get them from Instagram. Okay, artichoke dip recipes specifically for Instagram. So this way, when my husband's office has their office get together for the Super Bowl, I can make it a point to bring this dip. And then when people ask for the recipe, oh, I got it off of Instagram. What's your Instagram? And I can share it with you. Right. And that's going to be one of the ways I'm going to create a diplomatic situation for our family, because sometimes the wives or other people in the sales staff, they can be a bit aloof from the technical staff. And when it's time for promotion, it's hard for them to sometimes know the names. And so this is a way to kind of solidify our family's name amongst the upper management that my husband sometimes doesn't always get a chance to deal with, because one, he works a lot from home, and two, the technical side and the business side don't always get along. So sometimes it's up to the women to kind of facilitate those relationships. Also, too, it's really good for you single girls to find out the single guys on their job. You're like, oh, well, I can give you the recipe. What's your Instagram? And share it with them. I can completely understand why you would not want to date someone you worked with. But once you have access to their Instagram, you have access to their friends. And birds of a feather typically flock together. So it can get you into a circle of guys who maybe you might not otherwise have been in contact with. So definitely food as diplomacy. I hope that this lesson was helpful, and I look forward to putting a few more dark femininity lessons from the Bible, because I feel as if dark femininity gets a bad rap as being evil, and the Bible kind of gets misconstrued as people who don't have boundaries, who are supposed to be constantly self-sacrificial and pushovers. And neither one of those are true. There's actually good in each of them. So this is Mocha Mommy, and I'll see you in the next video.